Hello and welcome to whatever the hell I'm going to call this. We're going with Project Pineapple for now, otherwise known as, hey, I'm 30 years old, let's make a podcast. I'm Misfit and I'm here with my wife.
Hello, I am Brenna. That's all you need to know.
Yeah, for like a little short introduction. Her and I have been married for literally coming up on 1 year. Our anniversary is in like, from the time of us recording this, about a week away, or a little less than that even.
Yeah, it's a little less than a week.
Yeah. I've been throwing around this idea of just making a podcast for a little over a year now, and just sort of never really had the, time or really the follow-through to even get it off the ground. I did have, one attempt at one point, but that sort of went meh. So just sort of never did anything with that one. But it just so happened that there's been some recent stuff going on Twitter, or to use the big phrase, the discourse. What the discourse is God knows what, but once you've gotten up to out myself as being an incredibly old man of 30 years old, 31, you start to learn that whenever the phrase discourse refers to literally anything, it's probably just a bad faith argument and can probably be avoided entirely, but, yeah, this one's actually kind of interesting.
I honestly don't know what to add to that. Like, he's done pretty much cover the fact that there's pretty much always some form of discourse on Twitter. It's literally a who's of what is it this time.
Yeah, like, simplifying it just a little bit, both her and I are furries. Whoa, big shock, right? So, one of the biggest discourses right now going on, especially in furry, that being a very art-centric community, whether it be in audio or visual medium, is this new thing going on with AI-generated art.
Yeah, I guess the basis or short explanation is like there's like always two sides to everything, obviously, but the two sides are, as usual, kind of against each other. One side being a little bit more, or at least the more vocal of that side being a bit more toxic about considering AI art or AI generated art as like actual art, and people who use the AI generated process being considered artists themselves. The reason I say they're vocally more toxic is because quite a few of the more vocal ones have adopted this outlook of you old artists, you old traditional, you digital people of the art world should just accept it that you're being replaced by a new form of artist. And that's one viewpoint. The other viewpoint that's kind of tied to that viewpoint is you artists should be more humbled or more humble or act more humble due to this development.
There's also one other thing about it that's kind of odd, and this does come up a lot when anything related to art comes across. Like, there's always the little, once again, discourse about, like, artists and the rates they charge or whatever. Like, apparently some artists are charging way too much money for something, and some artists are severely undercharging themselves for whatever they make. Looking at you, hon.
Okay.
But, like, realistically, if you put a value on your art, that's what it's worth. It's like whatever the hell you want to exchange for that, for your service. At the end of the day, that's the sort of, like, deal that you make with somebody, is that you're providing your services to them in exchange for some form of compensation. Whether it just be shits and grins of having a good time or getting a warm feeling of making something for somebody else that they enjoy, or whether it's like actual money. And like, to go off on a tangent, in the system that we're in right now, as much as it shouldn't be that everything is based around money, in a lot of ways it kind of is, and that's unfortunately a condition that we're all sort of stuck under at the moment, at least here in the US and most other countries out there. But it's like, for your time to have been considered to be well spent by other people, you must be making a lot of money or something else off of it for what you're doing to have actual value. Like, there's no appreciation for the simple time and effort that somebody puts into it, as opposed to, like, the final product.
Yeah.
Basically, the material conditions of living under a capitalist society essentially are that if what you're doing is not profitable for you, then why the hell are you wasting your time? Which is not a good thing. Big shock, I am a millennial who's slightly on the commie side of things. Woo?
But on the same tangent is that there is usually a reason why people are putting so much time and money and effort into something that isn't giving them, well, a monetary feedback.
Yeah.
And that is the more emotional side to art and anything to do with art, especially, or any type of artist. Because a lot of people automatically assume art is either like 3D modeling or visual 2D, or even text-based art such as like basic writing or books, because those involve a form of imagination. However, there are more ways to be an artist than just those things. If you're a baker, or even in a way a computer programmer, you are creating something. And if you have like an emotional tie to what you're creating, if it's from imagination, and most of these are from imagination, if you are a computer programmer or a developer of software, even if it's not really visual and you're developing a language to make the visuals do as you want them to do, and you commission an artist who is who is the visual artist, you give that visual artist their credit for creating the visuals, but you as the programmer who created that language to make the computer do what you imagined it could do, that in itself is a form of art. You yourself are an artist, and you yourself are credited with that product or program that you've created. Like, it takes a team for a lot of these things, including like movies and animations. Yes, there are one-man teams for all of these things sometimes. There are people who have the skills to do everything by themselves. That is a very taxing thing to do it all, but it is and has been done, yes. But at the same time, each individual artist that works on a project together to create something to be more than just visually pleasing, that they each of them in respect are an artist that worked on the project, even down to people who just make food.
Yeah.
Just because somebody goes to culinary school and learns all there is to know on making food doesn't make them an artist of food, because there is that one small key ingredient, which is like the emotional imagination. Yeah, you can go to culinary school and you can learn all of these things and you can make food look visually pleasing. But if all you do is make it visually pleasing and there is no taste factor, there is no heart or passion put into those dishes, there is likelihood that they won't come out as good as they look. For a pretty good example, personally, is when my stepmother was around. Whenever she would get sick or just don't feel good, her food always turned out not so good. My husband here, he cooks and he enjoys cooking to an extent. If he doesn't feel good, if he's feeling sick, you can immediately tell something's wrong with his cooking or through his cooking, because there's not that same taste that makes it good. He has made the same thing 3 nights in a row before, and every single time it tastes different because it literally depends on how he's feeling. The first time he cooks it, it's usually amazing. It's like the best thing you've ever had because he's usually in that more happier experimental phase with the dish. And so it comes out better usually. The next couple of nights, not so much because he does work, he does commute and things like that between his job and everything. And he gets tired like everybody else. But there's also the thing of like making the same thing over and over again. You do get tired of that too. And if anything happened that like caused his mood to shift in a more negative aspect, the dish isn't going to be as good as the first time you made it. That doesn't mean it's not ever going to be as good as the first time you made it, but it all depends on how he's feeling too. Some people have argued that artists or people who are artists are too emotional and not logical enough to have or even bother with having a discussion over certain topics. And that one also includes things that are very close to artists, such as the whole um, AI generated art versus digital traditional medium arts.
So, what you were saying there earlier, that does bring up a couple of interesting points, especially about, like, for a good example, with cooking. Like, with cooking in general, you're following a recipe, is the idea. So, you've got this formula that you go through that you should ideally be able to make the exact same thing every single time as long as you follow this exact recipe to this exact specification. The same thing could be said for AI, because when you think about it, even though there's like the ability for an algorithm of sorts to just sort of change and to grow within its own parameters, it's all essentially determined by like the basic calculations, like the fundamentals of that recipe. So essentially, one thing that's you could argue that's kind of missing from AI generated art in general is that sort of, I guess, X factor of what the human is putting into it. Whether that be the random stroke of inspiration that makes them decide, hey, I think maybe a little bit of allspice instead of cinnamon might make this tart pop a little bit differently. Or maybe if I used a horsehair brush instead of this sable one instead, maybe that would make these lines go better while I'm inking this page or something. There's always some sort of element to that could be explored upon further, and I think that's one thing that's sort of overlooked somewhat by either people arguing for or against considering the validity of AI generated art as even being art, is that I think in a lot of ways we place way too much emphasis on that human element. Like, don't get me wrong, this isn't some argument in support of AI art in saying that it's superior in any way, shape, or form. I think it's just different. And that's one thing I can go into a little bit more on. Like, I personally think that something like AI art is great in the sense of, like, if you're trying to prototype something. Like, there's different AI algorithms and bots out there that you can use for, like, art is the big one, any sort of visual images, or even, like, music, which also, that's another case to consider, that you can have a sort of predetermined rhythmic pattern that's going to sound probably pretty snappy, but you can only use, like, the same sort of formula of kicks and snares on the ones and twos or whatever, and throwing in a little variation with maybe a occasional hi-hat or cymbal to get a good drum beat. But there's always, like, the little variations between, like, human performances, even if they know this musical piece. Maybe they're throwing in some sort of subconscious variation in there that they may not even be aware of. Like, I used to be a trumpet player for a long time, So you could accidentally, while you're playing, be slurring one of your notes and not be aware of it, or be playing something just a little bit more staccato, as opposed to if you're supposed to be just sort of more of a glissando transition.
Speaking on that, as someone who actually has used AI program for music, I will say this. I'm never going to claim that I made it, so that makes me a musician. Like, it is the program, it is the thing, it is the AI that is doing this for you. It's the only thing I use is my ear to see what it sounds nice to me, and then adjust using what settings it gives to adjust for me, and then using that. The biggest issue with AI generated content at all is the fact that it does essentially steal from already existing media in order to create. That is the biggest issue that the AI generated content actually has, is especially with art, it does take pieces from already existing artists, already existing works, be they past or present. Because one of the prompts that someone can give the AI art program is, hey, give me an art piece that looks like so and so's art, and it will look for so and so's art to cobble together what you're trying to ask of it.
Yeah, and that's like a thing that a lot of the older deep learning algorithms would do, like especially for some of the stuff with deep fake videos, where you would train the algorithm by giving it a set amount of inputs to draw the final product off of. Like if you're doing a video of somebody, you would need like their face in a variety of different ranges of motion so you could get the proper articulation, but also so you could recreate how it would look if their head were to suddenly like cock itself like maybe 5 degrees off center, and you'd still have a full view of what their face should look like, especially if you're doing like a body swap or something like that. There's plenty of videos you can find on YouTube of where those go like perfectly right or even just hilariously wrong.
I mean, that's also a technology that they've recently started using in films, especially like documentary films, um, in order to have the look of the person that may or may not still be around.
Yeah, even in like big budget productions, like the Star Wars the new trilogies had used some images of Carrie Fisher, and even in the Mandalorian, they used a body swap for Luke Skywalker at some point, having him appear. Spoilers for season 2 of The Mandalorian, which came out like a couple years ago. Um, but yeah, because the actor Mark Hamill, he obviously doesn't look like he did back there in the 70s and 80s, which, yeah, people age. And if you're trying to set a show in a specific timeline and you want this character to appear again, there's only so much you can do if you want to maintain some sort of consistency. So in that case, if the actor's on board with that and they want to do this, to me, that seems perfectly fine. Whereas if it's something like bringing back a deceased actor to just perform like a bit part in a role just because they own the rights to their likeness or whatever, that's a little bit more scummy, in my opinion. Like, in the case of Carrie Fisher, when there were some of her scenes that were shown posthumously, this was all signed off by the family, of course, so it's like, it's probably okay.
Well, the only problem that there is with that at all, besides, getting or not getting consent, is the fact that these big budget corporations sometimes don't require consent. And the way things are going right now, I can understand the whole not really wanting to embrace the AI, because there is AI to replicate voices out as well. So what happens when those big budget productions actually get a hold of not only being able to replicate an image of someone to the point to where the AI can algorithmically create a English, hold on.
Facsimile?
Facsimile. Yes, I'm having problems because my mouth is dry. Excuse me. But a facsimile of an actual human being to where you might have the uncanny valley effect of, it being a little bit off, but it's still enough to pass as an actual human. And if that actor is no longer amongst us, then yeah, they can make that actor appear wherever and however old they want, as long as they had enough information to feed the AI to replicate this. But when coupled with the fact that there are AI applications for mimicry of vocals based off of the same type of information being brought to that AI, that takes a whole nother darker turn too, because that means that should these things evolve the way they obviously are going to, as scummy as like Misfit said, as scummy as it is, there are people who are going to do that. They're going to not just make a facsimile of the person, but of their voice. And if it's good enough, it's going to trick everybody. There would be no need to there would be a bigger need actually to not just copyright your personal images of yourself, but your voice, everything about you would have to be guarded by a much stricter law in order to keep people from just, well, using and abusing. And that's the biggest issue with anything. Overuse or easy use can turn into an abuse of a program, a thing, or even a person.
I'm glad that you brought up the audio, because actually, one of the podcasts I've guested on, Occulte Veritatis, they had an episode, years ago, episode 94, about deepfakes, where they actually had one of the hosts, get like a deepfake version of their voice and actually appear as like a part of the intro, if I remember correctly. But like how you're mentioning with where you get that sort of uncanny valley appearance with some of the body swaps and whatnot. Another good example, back on the Star Wars bandwagon, Rogue One, the actor who played Governor Tarkin, I believe, played by Peter Cushing, he'd passed away like I think well into the 90s. So he'd been gone for a while, and this will be like one of the not the first time because there've been other versions of it shown. If you ever get a chance, check out the Fake Shemp, which is pretty much the precursor to a lot of that stuff. And that's an interesting story in and of itself. But basically, it was one of the first times it'd been used on like a really major big budget production, and it kind of worked in some angles, but as soon as you saw the body in motion, it all fell apart.
Like there are people who make like My Little Pony content using the voice modular AI thing. And it's hard to state as an artist myself, it is hard to state an opinion for or against certain things. Like yes, I agree that people should have better technology and tools to be able to do the things that they've always wanted to do. Like I know there are people out there who have huge grand imaginations but do not have or have never been able to learn or have the skills to to make these things a reality. So, some of it might be a bit on the impatience side. I can get that side of the angle too. Some people are just not patient enough to learn, but that doesn't mean everyone's incapable of learning the skill. But on the flip side of that, as someone who has taken a college art course before, I know for a fact that art instructors can be very negative. For a good example of that is when I was in one of these classrooms during break, I would doodle little cartoon characters, you know. Well, my art teacher, my art professor, did not like that and exclaimed to me multiple times every time they saw it that that did not belong in their classroom because it was not art. They did not consider that art. And any other artist can and would tell you now, especially, that that viewpoint is not okay because cartoons are a form of art. Animation is a form of art. Drawing and designing caricatures from the basis of your imagination is a form of art. It may not be the type of art that that instructor or professor enjoys, but it is a type of art. But having that amount of negativity from an instructor can very much dampen the learning process for someone to learn these skills. So there is the in the whole of it, there is a human error. Always. There's always a human error amongst these debates because you can see all sides of the debate. I can understand a person not wanting to learn because they're impatient. I can understand a person not wanting to learn because they had, well, a dick of a teacher. Like, that is very understandable. It is very human error. However, there is no real reason to be toxic towards the people that did go through that dick of a teacher and basically flip them the bird when they graduated. There is no reason to be toxic to the person who did study and take years to try to hone their craft or skills in order to not just bring enjoyment to themselves, but enjoyment to others. There are many artists of every kind that the main thing that got them started as being an artist is the fact that they wanted to entertain. They wanted to make others happy, not just themselves. Yes, they wanted to make things. They want to make things for themselves. We are selfish. As an artist myself, I am selfish. I want to just doodle all day things that just pop into my head. But I also want to make my friends smile. I want to make the people who ask me for art to feel good about themselves. So I work with them. So there's no reason to be toxic towards to those people, but there's a lot of people that I've seen like scrolling through, well, Twitter especially, that are being very toxic to these people. And there's really no reason for it. I get that the whole AI versus non-AI debate is possibly making some people feel like artists are just shitting on them, as lack of better words, for not wanting to learn those skills. But in another turn of events, there's no reason for people to literally be shitting on artists of every kind of type of artist, be them musicians, bakers, candlestick makers. Yes, I'm making a reference and I don't care. Because candlestick making isn't easy either. Like, I've seen how it's done. It's not easy. Just like glass blowing, that is not an art medium to get into. Like I said, as much as I do understand the want to have an easy way to make content by yourself without having to rely on another human being, I get that. There shouldn't be any toxicity towards both groups, but there's going to be, because that is, once again, human error. But saying all that reminds me of a very strange analogy that somebody tried to bring up in describing the whole AI controversy, which is to say, according to that person, or that person's writing, I'm not going to say any names because I don't know them. I just saw it on Twitter. I'm going to paraphrase. A guy or a person going into Subway to make or get a sandwich, they tell the person who's making the sandwich all the details, all the instructions on how to create their sandwich. And therefore, to them, that makes them the maker of the sandwich, not the person who actually had hold of the bread and ingredients and was putting it all together as they went down the line until they came to the cashier, bought their sandwich, and went on their merry way. I do find that to be a very poor analogy, only because there's the big kicker throughout all of this that I've seen, all of this discourse I've seen, is just because you gave the machine or the person the instructions on what to do doesn't mean nor does that make you the artist, because you didn't actually do anything. You just told something or someone what to do. That makes you someone who can imagine or has an imagination to be an artist, but it still takes actual input from you. And I don't mean input as in just editing using the settings or the little ticks or check boxes that allows you to tell the AI or the person how much or how little you want something on your sub. And here's the other thing about that. If you want to use that as an analogy, that also means that there is an error in the AI. Because while you give them these prompts and those minute details, those instructions to how to make your perfect sandwich for the day, just like you do the poor Subway worker, there's human error. Subway man doesn't have time to get your sandwich perfect and can only do so much with the time given and with the training that they're given to make your sandwich. You decide that you want, let's say, green peppers. You like green peppers, you like a spicy sandwich, and they offer green peppers at the Subway. You ask them to put green peppers. Well, they put one green pepper on your Subway sandwich. But you wanted more peppers. You wanted more green peppers. So you tell them you want more green peppers. So they grab a handful and just dump it on the sandwich. But now that's too many green peppers. But you ain't got time to tell them not to take some off because you got 4 or 5 other people behind you wanting to order that or order their own sub. So you just got to deal with it. What does a normal person do? Do they get mad and complain and just eat the sandwich anyway? Or do they take the extra green peppers off and actually put manual input into their sandwich?
Yeah, and that actually brings up a really good point. Like, among some of the other arguments I've heard in the past about this, because another big shock, this topic ain't exactly new either. But one of the things that I'd heard is that anyone who uses an AI shouldn't be considered an artist, which I'll say, okay, fair enough. Maybe they wanted to go by the idea that whoever created the AI is the true artist. Okay, so this may be just sort of stretching it a little bit, but work with me on it. Like, hon, what's the art program that you use?
Clip Studio Paint?
Did you code Clip Studio Paint?
Hell no, I don't know how to do that.
Nope, you're not an artist. Fuck you. So it's just like that. At the end of the day, if you're using an AI generator to come up with art or anything like that, there still has to be someone behind the keyboard who comes up with some sort of idea like, I want to see fucking biblically accurate angels in the infield. And then the AI will spit out the best it can with whatever input that you give it, sampling from its various sources. I would credit the person who came up with that individual idea as definitely an artist. They were just using a tool that they had. But when it comes down to, do they own that art or do they own that concept? That's where I don't know, I'd be a little bit more hesitant about it, but I wouldn't hold it against them if they decide to take that art and claim it as something they made, as long as the same thing as anybody who does digital art. They'll usually disclose, hey, I use Paint Tool Sci, or hey, I use Clip Studio Paint, or hey, I'm a fucking renegade. I did this in Corel Draw 6.
Or even on the 3D modeling programs, they would credit using Blender. And if they use special plugins or special brushes that they themselves did not make, because there are some artists that do make their own brushes and their own shortcuts in Blender. But if they use plugins that were made by somebody else, usually they do tell you that that's what they did. That's how they made that, especially if somebody asks. But just like what he was saying, what Misfit was saying, there is still, like, from what I was saying, there's still that human input to create it. Just because you have all those shortcuts, all those little niche things, those nice little add-ons to make the workflow a little bit easier, that doesn't mean that you check off some boxes and the programs do it for you. You actually have to do something. Like,
Yeah, Dolly Mini doesn't create its 9-panel spread out of nothing. Somebody's got to come up with the idea to put into it for it to create some sort of horrible nightmare abomination for you to share around to your friends on Insta. It's like, oh hey, check this shit out. It's fucking weird. I made a penis riding a motorcycle.
but as long as a person, like, as far as that concerns, as long as the person is set, not just saying, this makes me an artist, this makes me this makes me that, you should commission me or something like that. As those things, they're a little bit more, like he said, a little bit more hesitant to say yes or no to. But as long as a person admits that I done this or I made this via an AI program, like, then yeah, you give credit where credit's due, because yeah, somebody did make that AI program, but that doesn't mean somebody made that AI program. Somebody coded it, just like they coded Clip Studio Paint, but that doesn't mean that I'm not an artist, or the person isn't exactly an artist. They are a different type of artist.
Yeah, at the end of the day, they're just as responsible for the results of their individual brand of brainworms as anybody else is.
Mm-hmm.
And
But
for the most part, this all just sort of ends up trickling down into just some kind of messed up no true Scotsman fallacy where everyone's passing judgment because you don't use the specific tool that I do, or in this case, like, you use AI art for prototyping, or you even use it as a base for something, or maybe the AI is the entirety of your art, and therefore yours is less valid, or not valid in this case.
but it would be more, if people are arguing that us artists need to be more humble, then the people programming the AIs need to be humble enough themselves to cite or be able to cite the sources that the AI has been fed for the art pieces that it uses. Because going back to that thing earlier, that is the big problem with the AI programs, is the fact that it is taking material that doesn't really belong to it in order to create. It is essentially stealing other people's art, people who worked really hard to learn their skill just so it would be an easier tool for someone who may be too lazy to learn, may be too impatient to learn, maybe they had a really bad experience in school and just don't want to deal with that, or don't have the kinds of monies or funds or functions to be able to learn or have those skills. There are many reasons why someone can't do some things, but that doesn't mean that it's okay to just take and not give credit where credit's due. If you, as If you as people are going to use the AI programs to create art so that way you yourself can finally envision the thoughts in your head onto paper, then and you want people to acknowledge that as art and acknowledge you as an artist, then as an artist, one needs to be humble enough to cite the sources and give credit where credit is due.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, I think the AI programs would do better if I know what I've read on Twitter about how certain people who are part of big time corporations of their own making have made their point that they made certain AI programs because of artists saying that people need to credit where credit's due, and they want to shove that down other people's throats by saying that that's not something you should do, while also claiming credit for creating something themselves, mind you.
Yeah.
If you think it's not okay to credit someone, then you shouldn't get mad when somebody takes something from you, references you, or even steals from you and recreates things or makes something of their own without crediting your idea or your art or whatever talent that you have. You can't get mad if you aren't going to participate in the thing that you're mad about. Yeah, I get it. It's very difficult to credit everybody who is a source of what you've made. But this is not about being humble or not humble. This is not about being boastful or not boastful or anything like that. This isn't even an argument or a. How do I put it? This isn't a chiding or advice per se. This is two people's opinions on the matter. And therefore, you can take everything we say with a grain of salt and not even care.
Yeah. Like, speaking for myself as a graduate from the Dunning-Kruger Institute of Conventional Knowledge, um, I have no expertise on this. I'm neither much of an artist nor am I any sort of expert on computer programming. I know only a little about most things, and that's enough for me to get by with the kind of stuff that I do. So, this is just as much outside of my wheelhouse as it is kind of in the same vein of a lot of stuff I'm interested in. And of course, like, there's just sort of the fact that it's a relevant interest, considering that this is kind of my wife's career in a sense. This is what she does. She do the doodle. But basically, yeah, this is just, like she said, two people's opinion on it. We are not Judge Judy and executioner on passing judgment on whether or not AI content is valid as art or not. Personally, if you've listened this far, you've probably guessed that yeah, we're more or less cool with it. We have some reservations about it, the same way we'd have reservations about most other things. In this case, the same thing that you learned in your high school language and history classes: cite your sources.
Yeah. Like, credit where credit's due. And personally, when someone credits where credit is due or puts credit where credit is due, it does make new technologies, new fields come through a little bit more smoother, as well as making sure the whole overuse turns to abuse thing is a bit more, not really abolished, but turned down to where it's not so much as an immediate threat.
Yeah. And that's another thing, too, is that as something like this starts to become a lot more widely accessible, good example again was Dolly, because for a while everybody was posting all the weird shit that they could create with that just to see like the potential behind this. I don't think that in reality most people would actually consider that AI is going to be a full-on replacement for it. Like the concept of that is kind of absurd. To me, I would see it becoming something of an alternative, but not necessarily a replacement. Regardless of how you look at it, there's always going to be niche markets for all kinds of things. If someone really wants some AI generated imagery just to see what happens, then they're going to look for it, or they're going to create it, or create the means for that to happen. Whereas if people want something done more traditionally, or just in the regular vein that you'd expect from commissioning an artist and going through that process of working with your artist, giving them references, the idea for what you want them to make, and then seeing what comes out about that, and having feedback and input with them, and going along that sort of creative process. If you
Let
have,
alone permission.
yeah, if you have the time, resources, and patience for that on both ends, then definitely. If you're looking for a quick fix, if you're like a GM in some sort of game and you just need to crank out a quick background for just a reference image for your players, or you're just trying to come up with an idea for some other sort of concept, like I previously mentioned, using it as a means for prototyping an idea, absolutely. AI is the perfect spot for that. Because then maybe you've come across some sort of concept that you want to send off to other artists for, can you do something incorporating this kind of style, or maybe something that's a larger piece expanding on the details of this one, and give somebody else the parameters and then free reign to do whatever they want with that.
Yeah. And going back to what I mentioned when I said permission, that did bring up something into mind that, yeah, that's another thing. Besides giving credit where credit's due, if the AI people or the people who are making the AI art generator algorithm want to make it more not only accessible but successful, as not a replacement for actual artists, but like Misfit said, as like a prototyping concept ground, um, then honestly, and this is my opinion, honestly, I think things would have already been much smoother at this point and stage if they had went and not only just cited sources, but also got permission from those sources to take
Mm-hmm.
for their algorithm.
And I think a lot of it too is also just in the presentation of it. Like if you were to suggest the art as being something for prototyping, or just simply as a tool for something that you can do, then it might be taken a lot better by a lot of the people that have that sort of negative opinion of it, because they've been antagonized by the people that are trying to push this as a replacement, which may not necessarily reflect the beliefs of the people who created these different algorithms or bots that can actually generate these images. Because that's also a thing where the art and the tool for making it may not necessarily be kind of hand in hand with the person who actually wrote it.
Yeah. Like there's I mean there are some that, like I said, some well-known people who have stated that that was their purpose behind the creation of their AI art generators. But that doesn't mean that's reflective of every one of the other people who have created their own algorithm and AI art generation program. And that, honestly, that shouldn't be how it should be seen. It shouldn't be seen as a replacement, because digital art, when digital art was introduced, it did not replace traditional. Yes, more people use digital art because it became an easier tool to use for artists. But there are still people to this day that have tutorials, have videos, speed paints, do YouTube, do Twitch, and use traditional mediums like oil paintings or just plain sketchbooks. Or even some of them actually just use coloring pencils. Don't even bother inking it, it's just a sketch and coloring pencils. Uh, these still exist and are still being used and are still being viewed to this day as well. These mediums didn't get replaced by digital artists. At first, yeah, traditional artists were upset with digital artists. Why? Because when the digital art programs came out, certain people did try to make it out to be a replacement for traditional, no more need for papers or messy paints. And that was the wrong approach when introducing digital art medium as an art medium. There were a lot of artists who were traditional artists who did not see digital art as as an art form or a way to actually create art due to that antagonizing intro, because it antagonized and threatened their very way of life. For a lot of them, that was their career. That was how they made money. It wasn't just a hobby for some of them. And so that was a threat when digital art was introduced. That was a basic threat to their livelihood. So, of course, they weren't going to consider it art. But nowadays, it's considered a form of art, a different type of art form. Because people slowly started realizing that, yeah, we're not replacing, we digital artists are not replacing you traditional artists. Heck, half of them started as traditional artists that moved to digital mediums. Some of the reasons was because the traditional medium was a bit too expensive at the time. And buying one program and maybe a small little or little tablet thing was cheaper than the amounts of paints, brushes, easels, and everything, sketchbooks, canvases, everything that was required to make one individual painting or one individual sketch. It was seen as like a money thing for some. I am a digital artist. I use a tablet. I have many friends who also use tablets and art programs. And at one point in time, yeah, we as digital artists were not seen as real artists too, but that was also, as like Misfit said, the presentation, how we came into this as digital artists.
Yeah, there's probably at one point like some person who was more or less claiming that they were going to be the hot new shit just because they'd mastered this new form of media was that they were trying to project as being like overtaking the more traditional versions of art, instead of like the perception of you've got this sort of upstart asshole behind the keyboard who's creating the Mona Lisa or whatever, versus somebody who's spending like actual real blood, sweat, and tears to make something on a piece of canvas, where a lot of people don't really understand that the time and investment that it takes to learn how to become an artist is essentially the same regardless of what medium you're doing. A sculptor is going to take a long time to master their craft and become great at it, whether or not they're doing it with a hammer and chisel into marble versus sculpting something in ZBrush or whatever. Because both of those are two very different skill sets, but can be used to achieve similar results.
Yeah. I'm sorry, my brain, a thought process comes and goes.
That's okay. But I suppose we've been on this topic for a little while now, so
Yeah.
we might want to put a pin in it here, and we'll say if you've made it this far, thank you everybody for listening, and yeah, we'll try and even come up with a name for this one. I'm starting to lean towards married millennials.
Oh God, no. I mean, hey, whoever does listen to this, if yuns want to give suggestions, or hey, even not just suggestions for like the name of this thing that we're doing here, but give suggestions for like possible topics, things you want to hear us talk about for whatever reason. Go right ahead. I have no problem with that. I'm pretty sure he doesn't either, but I'll let him speak for himself.
Nah, I've got no problem with that. If anyone wants to suggest anything, by all means, you can hit one of us up on our Twitters. Myself, at Misfit Raider, or you can hit me on my Final Fantasy Twitter, at Athabasca P. I'm not even gonna spell that out.
Nah. My Twitter's at UVPalm. Literally, that's it. It's the only way you'll contact me. Not gonna lie. Like, I do have a Final Fantasy 14 one, but I'm not on it enough to say that you can contact me on it whatsoever. And I'm barely on Twitter anyways. I like go to look for things every now and then or see what like something my friends have done, but I don't like frequent Twitter too much. So yeah, that's about as good as you're gonna get on contacting me, so
Yeah. So, like, if you have any suggestions on topics, definitely let us know any way that you can. Uh, Otherwise, yeah, we'll probably record another episode at some point, just us chatting about stuff. This one was a little bit sort of off the cuff, where she had found this topic that when she was telling me a little bit about it, it's like pretty clear that you have a lot to say on this, actually. And so while she was going off on it, I was spending some time creating this whole mini Discord group and inviting a wonderful recording bot in, and just trying to remember some of the stuff I had learned from a couple of the other podcasts that I've been on to try and throw this together and finally get something going with this project of mine that's just been sort of backburnered ever since like the pandemic.
Yeah, he's been wanting to do one of these things for a long time. I've kept telling him to just do it whenever, and yeah, he never does, so.
That's one of the wonderful things. Like, I'm a great idea pitch man, but I have no follow through on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Which I definitely gotta really work on.
But I guess it's a lucky thing he has me, I suppose, because not only am I guess I'm helping with this, but I suppose lighting a lukewarm fire under his ass. But I've also talked him into maybe a possible another project that details and things like that will be worked out later between me, him, and maybe a few of our other friends if I could talk them into this. And no, I'm not going to tell what it is because I'm one of those people that I don't really like talking about stuff like that because if it's going to raise like too much, oh my god, yes, please do it, because then I'm going to get nervous. I'm going to get shy. I will admit that right now that I will get, I guess, anxious or some form of anxiety to where I will be afraid to let everybody down or not be or the bar would be too high for me to reach. I'm only 5'4". I don't need it to be too high. I barely reach things as is. So
I was just sort of like at the start of this. I think you were a little bit stunned that we were actually doing this, and like I could tell at the beginning that you're a little bit quiet, and then eventually, once we got into it, you just sort of just ran with it. It was like with the streams that you do occasionally, like back when I was able to be on more of them. Like it would take a couple minutes for you to warm up and then just get the drive for it, and then as soon as you went live, like all that hesitation and reservation was gone halfway because you had me and a couple other people to chat with, but because you'd finally psyched yourself up into it.
yeah. And speaking of that, yes, I will be streaming again, or starting to stream again, but it won't be for a little while. So I cannot give a definite date as to when I will start streaming again, but it will definitely be sometime after my and his wedding anniversary and my birthday. So
Would that by any chance be at twitch.tv/BrennaMSM?
I wasn't going to do that, but okay. But yes, that would.
Yeah. We might have a couple episodes where we're just gonna sit and talk about stuff. We might have a couple episodes here and there where we've got like an actual topic that we're discussing. We may or may not have friends appear on here at some point if they feel up for it, especially if it's like for a topic that either they're passionate about or that they just feel up to talking about with us. If it's like something interesting to either them or us or even anyone who's listening. But I think I've said that like 3 or 4 times now.
Yeah, it's alright. These aren't scripted, I'm pretty sure, so.
Nah.
Sorry, guys, you have to deal with the raw conversation. There is no script, so if we say things several times over, that is, as I've said many times tonight, human error. Deal with it.
I think that's a good one to end it on. So, thank you for listening to a couple of millennials just babble about a topic for an hour.
Okay, there's our next topic already. Labels.
Yeah, that's a good one. So yeah, thank you, and have a good rest of your day or night.
Good night. Sleep tight. Don't let the creepies bite.
Have a good one.